Hey, you okay?
I'm fine, I'm not crying.
The film begins showing a nerdy and geeky guy named Matthew. At that time, Matthew was anxious because his mother transferred him to a new school, even though Matthew had received a scholarship and had several friends at his old school. The reason his mother transferred Matthew to the school was because she had just married a widower, so she had to follow her new husband wherever he went. Apart from not liking his stepfather, Matthew was also afraid of being bullied at his new school.
Here's the reading list. It's long. Be able to float through this course.
On the first day, Matthew had already received a less than warm welcome twice from a naughty student named Nick, although Nick was a bit rude, but later Nick would become Matt's best friend at the school, who would always defend him. In addition, Nick also introduced Matt to a girl named Ruby. Not long after, both of them invited Matthew to join an exclusive club at the school, and because he felt bad refusing, he finally had to follow their wishes. To become a member of the club, Nick asked Matthew to ask Teresa, who was the head cheerleader at the school, to go on a date with him. Not long after, Matthew immediately went to Teresa to ask her out on a date according to Nick's orders, but suddenly Teresa's boyfriend, Hector, came to him. Hector, who couldn't accept his girlfriend being teased by a nerdy guy, immediately taught Matthew a lesson at that time.
Hector!
I'm watching you, loser.
That night, Matthew returned home and packed his things, and not long after his stepfather came to win his son's heart. At that time, Matthew was seen putting up a photo of a boxer who was none other than his own grandfather when he was young. Seeing Matthew, who liked boxing his stepfather, gave Matthew a book containing the life story of a famous boxer named Muhammad Ali. Matthew looked very happy to receive the book, so happy that he took the book with him wherever he went. And the next day, without him realizing it, Hector, who was not satisfied with beating him yesterday, suddenly brought a group of school thugs to bully him. Unexpectedly, the incident was seen by a school cleaner named Barnes. Unable to stand the bullying, Barnes approached them and asked Hector to clean up what he had just done. From here it can be seen that Hector and his friends are very afraid of Barnes. At the same time, Barnes accidentally saw a boxing book in Matthew's hand. He guessed that Matthew liked the world of boxing and suggested that Matthew join the boxing club at the school. Not accepting being scolded by Barnes earlier, Hector and his friends came back to Matthew and tried to bully him again. Seeing Matthew, who was in danger, Nick came and defended his friend so that a fight broke out between them. As a result of the incident, Matthew and Nick were blamed, and they had to accept the score for 1 week. In the evening, Matthew apparently thought about Barnes's offer, and finally he ventured to ask his mother for permission to join the boxing club. Hearing the request, his mother immediately went berserk angry, because from the beginning, his mother really disliked the sport. Not allowed to join the boxing club for unclear reasons, Matthew turned angry at his mother because all this time he always obeyed his mother's orders. Shortly afterwards, his mother came back to Matthew and gave him the real reason. She felt that boxing was a very dangerous sport. She didn't want her son to end up like his father. She wanted Matthew to have a normal life. But Matthew's reason for joining the boxing club and becoming a boxer was not just to be cool, but he wanted to protect himself from bullies and follow in the footsteps of his grandfather, who was a champion. Unfortunately, this reason was also unacceptable to his mother. The next day, Matthew secretly went to the boxing club at the school. He looked amazed and happy because he felt he had a place to channel his talents. Before practicing, the coach named Harvard said that in the near future, they would hold a match called IBA, and the school would select the best 1 or 2 people to be included in the school's delegation team. When Harvard was talking, suddenly, Hector and his friend Joe, who is the golden boy as well as a member of the club, came, which made Matthew very scared. He finally undid his intention and tried to get out of there. Meanwhile, Barnes, who saw Matthew wanted to leave, immediately prevented him and asked Matthew not to stop just because he was afraid of the two of them. For starters, Harvard asked Hector and Joe to show their skills in front of everyone.
That's it. Nice, new guy. Nice.
After the time was up, Harvard also asked Hector to fight Matthew, which of course Matthew was a bit shocked because he had never practiced boxing before. But inevitably, he had to follow the coach's orders, and finally, he was forced to fight with Hector. After the training was over, Matthew, who was now battered and expelled from the club, could only lie down at the training ground. It wasn't long before Barnes came to him and asked Matthew not to give up there. At that time, Matthew, who was curious, asked why Barnes was so enthusiastic about helping him. Apparently Barnes was also a clumsy and geeky kid like Matthew, but thanks to training and hard work, he finally turned into a fighter and won several boxing fights. Then Matthew asked again, asking why Barnes did not continue his profession as a boxer, and Barnes replied that he preferred to be a cleaner to support his family. He felt that boxing did not bring him enough money, so he only considered boxing as a means of having fun. Hearing Barnes's explanation, Matthew was amazed by the man's way of thinking. Finally, Matthew asked Barnes to teach him how to play boxing properly, and without lingering, Barnes finally showed Matthew how to box properly.
Balance. Getting too narrow, not good. This jab's gonna keep the other fighter from getting his rhythm, okay? Okay. There you go, straight down the pipe.
Since then, every time Matthew came home from school, he always met Barnes in his room and asked him to teach him boxing. In addition to practicing in his room, Barnes also asked Matthew to exercise diligently to make his body stronger. When he was running, Matthew suddenly felt dizzy, and Barnes was curious about what happened. Apparently, Matthew was a leukemia sufferer. This is what made his mother never like boxing because it was too dangerous for her son. His mother hoped that one day Matthew would grow up to be a doctor or a lawyer. Hearing this, Barnes could not blame Matthew's mother completely. If he were in Matthew's position, he would listen to his mother's advice. However, even so, Barnes gave Matthew another way. He said that Matthew could be a boxer and whatever he wanted at the same time, so Matthew didn't need to be afraid to let go of his dreams. Even though he didn't get his mother's blessing, Barnes still wanted to help Matthew train to become a great boxer, and those words made Matthew feel happy.
Yes! Woo! Yes!
And since then, Matthew also began to change his appearance, which made him look much cooler. Even since then, he also mentally trained, and he began to dare to ignore when Hector tried to bully him. Hector, who was annoyed because Matthew ignored him, also tried to trap Matthew. He lied to Matthew by saying Harvard allowed him to return to the club. Matthew, who was not at all suspicious of them, immediately believed and went to the training ground with Hector, but when he got there, suddenly they asked Matthew to immediately get into the ring to fight Hector. Not long after that, Barnes came to stop them, but Hector did not accept it, and insulted Barnes, who worked as a cleaner. Not accepting this, Barnes taught Hector a lesson, but not long after that, Harvard, who seemed to be on Hector's side, came and defended his foster children. After that, Harvard came to Barnes and promised that Hector would not do that to Matthew again. However, Barnes was not satisfied and asked Hector to receive a fitting punishment for beating Matthew mercilessly. Harvard replied that he could not punish him because Hector was the golden boy at the school, but Barnes could not accept that reason and asked for a fitting response. In return, Barnes asked Harvard to allow Matthew to fight Hector at the AIBA event later, because if not, Barnes threatened to report this incident to the school so that Hector would receive a fitting punishment. Because he did not want that to happen, Harvard finally agreed to the request, but with one condition: Matthew's parents had to agree to their son taking part in the fight. Meanwhile, in a different place, Matthew is seen starting to get discouraged by the world of boxing, even avoids Barnes every day. Barnes, who realized this, immediately looked for him and immediately said that he had registered Matthew for a match against Hector. Suddenly, Matthew was shocked and afraid that his life would end at Hector's hands, but Barnes tried to calm the boy by saying that he promised to continue training Matthew until he brought him to victory. Then, without further ado, Barnes asked Matthew to tidy up his books and train him right away. In this training, Barnes began to see significant changes in Matthew. He continued to develop, and Barnes was very sure that Matthew could defeat Hector. Even Barnes was willing to take Matthew to the official training ground to have a duel.
Do something. Head away. Time.
After training, Matthew immediately went home and racked his brains on how to get his parents' signatures. Feeling that his mother would not allow him to take part in the match, Matthew finally forged his stepfather's signature. The next day after school, Matthew returned to Barnes, but unfortunately the man was not there, so Matthew chose to train alone. After that, Matthew returned home and found his homeroom teacher, who was already there. The arrival of his homeroom teacher was to clarify whether Matthew's parents really allowed their son to take part in the match. Finding out that Matthew had forged his stepfather's signature made both of them furious. Not only that, apparently Barnes, who illegally trained Matthew, was also fired from his job. Hearing this, Matthew immediately went berserk and did not accept their treatment. He felt guilty because Barnes had lost his job just because he helped him, who was always bullied. Seeing Matthew frustrated made his mother give in and allow Matthew to join the match, but with one condition: that he could not be trained by Barnes. Of course, Matthew did not accept the decision because according to him, Barnes understood boxing better than Harward as the coach at their school. Matthew, who was angry, left the house and went looking for the whereabouts of Barnes until finally he found the whereabouts of the man. Apparently, after being fired from school, Barnes worked as a ship cleaner at the docks. Matthew immediately said his purpose there and apologized for getting Barnes fired from his job. Besides that, Matthew also admitted that he could not continue the fight without the help of Barnes. Barnes was quite disappointed with Matthew's decision. He said that Matthew had to fight alone, especially in the ring later. Matthew would fight alone without the company of anyone. Finally, Matthew admitted that he was actually afraid of fighting Hector, and Barnes said this was what Hector wanted from Matthew. Even Hector hoped that Matthew would not take part in the fight so that he would still be crowned champion. And in the end, after being given a little advice, inevitably Matthew had to continue the fight and show his best. After hearing Barnes's explanation, Matthew became excited again and wanted to continue the fight. Time passed and the match day arrived. This fight would later be witnessed by their family and close friends. Seeing Matthew, who was nervous, Hector and Joe came to destroy his mentality, but at that time, Matthew tried to fight them both. Not accepting Matthew's resistance, Hector threatened to finish him off in the boxing ring. Then the referee called the participants to immediately enter the match arena, and unexpectedly at that time, Barnes was also there to support Matthew. Not only Barnes, Matthew's grandfather also came all the way from Florida to watch his grandson's fight. Before the main fight, the referee asked the other participants to fight first, and this time Joe was asked to fight someone first. Seeing Joe's defeat in the ring made Matthew's fear even more intense, but Barnes' words kept ringing in his head, which made him even more confident. Not long after the referee finally called Matthew and Hector to get into the ring. They will be asked to fight for 3 minutes and divided into 3 rounds.
Fight.
Hector, won't you?
Hands up, Matthew, hands up.
Hector did control the first round, even though Matthew had tried to compensate, but after the whistle sounded and the referee asked them to stop, Hector deliberately attacked Matthew. Seeing his grandson struggling alone, his grandfather stepped in to give his grandson tips, and it wasn't long before the second round of the match finally began.
Take control.
Over there.
1, 2, 4, 5, 6.
Seeing Matthew unable to fight, Hector made Barnes quite worried and got out of his seat. He tried to give directions on how to knock out the opponent. Not long after the bell rang and the two continued the fight. Who would have thought that Matthew finally won the third round of the fight and made Hector knock out? Everyone there shouted, celebrating this victory. Not long after, the judges finally announced the winner, but who would have thought that Hector was the winner because he was superior in the previous 2 sessions? Even though Matthew lost the fight, he was still included in the team to replace Hector, who would graduate next year. Shortly after the event was over, Barnes immediately left there and continued his life. He really hoped to meet Matthew again. The film ended by showing Matthew taking a picture with his family as a celebration of being selected as the school representative in the national championship.